Good afternoon and most welcome to H774. We are actually currently in the house in Eggvena, which is a further half a mile or a mile from Vårgårda, in the middle of the woods. And it's a lovely day. We have a temperature around 2 minus, that would be somewhere in the vicinity of 29 Fahrenheit, I'll guess. The birds seem very happy, and we actually saw some sunshine earlier on, but still it's a rather clear and nice day. I'd like to start this lecture rather differently by telling you a story. It's the story about Frederick Banting. And I think maybe indirectly you heard his name already, because Banting is the precursor of banta or banting, losing weight. And his life was all about losing weight, or rather I would say stopping the loss of weight. Isn't that weird? How is that connected? It's also the story about breaking preconceived rules for how things should be. And that, I would like to say, is actually at the very core of what a scientist does. Banting himself was born in 1891 in Canada. He started out as a farmer, but he felt it was not his call, so he started to study as a doctor in Toronto. 2 years later, the Great War broke out, and they shortened the education for all the doctors, so he didn't get a full education, and he had to work at the field hospital. At the field hospital, he didn't get much development other than very practical. So we have a doctor who didn't finish off his education, but rather got a lot of practice, one could say, at the field hospital. Well, some doctors say nothing can compare to the experience you get at the field hospital. You need to treat patients on a queue, more or less. And what you learn that cannot be replaced. And I think this goes into what happened later. He started his practice in the town of London, actually not situated in England, but in Ontario. He thought it would be a very successful job, but what happened, most of his patients wanted him to prescribe alcohol. Alcohol was banned at the time, and the only way of getting alcohol was to get a prescription for it. And Banting wrote in his biography, I wrote recipe after recipe, and I understood in the end I had turned into a bartender rather than a doctor. At the end of the month, he had earned a measly $4. 2 months later, his fiancée to be married handed in her engagement ring, and all his life's dream was in ruins. In the end, he has to work as an assistant for a teacher in a school, and he only got $4 an hour. We need to remember these were Canadian dollars. It was very little money. In order to get some rest at night, he read really boring scientific discourses and articles, so he could go to sleep. And at the night of the 30th October 1920 was no exception. He read the text of the pathologist Moses Barron. Barron had operated or what is that called? Obduced a person with a gallbladder problem that was blocking the pancreas and its outsource. And it seemed that this blockage had caused the enzymes that help the body to metabolize the food to come out, and the person therefore died. That gave, and this is important, it was a blockage of the gallbladder. And as you know, the gallbladder is what hands in the enzymes to metabolize food, goes to the intestines. Remember that. Somehow that was an idea, and he writes in his biography it was an embryo. And remember, an embryo is not a correct idea. An embryo is a false idea. This is not true, and that is very important. He started thinking about something completely different, and that was the pancreas. It actually produced enzymes to help digestion, but it also produced something else, insulin. And he started to think, maybe there is a connection with certain diseases and this lack of insulin. So he took the idea of blockage to a complete different areas. And this is what we call movement, moving a function from one place to another way. And the actual function was a sort of blockage of an organ. This was the very embryo of trying out a new turn in his life. And he started to think, maybe somehow the blockage can be helped. And he started on that area, and then he started realizing, maybe somehow I can give those people that has the blockage or whatever it is the much needed substance, the insulin. And he started trying out with most different things, and he didn't know where to get insulin. You can't get it from a healthy person. You cannot get it at any quantity from a dead person. So he started thinking, maybe I can get it from cattle, something like that. And he started his investigation, and there were loads of willing research subjects. The reason was diabetes in the 1920s was a death sentence. So all these people were more or less already gone. What happens if it's untreated, if you don't get insulin, you lose weight. You lose more and more weight until you disappear, because what happens in the body, all the fat disappear. So he started trying out, and the first subject was a young boy named Thomas, and he only weighed a measly 60 pounds. That's the equivalent of 30 kilos. And that's very little, as you understand, for a almost fully grown man. And he tried first, it didn't succeed, and I think in most cases, if it doesn't succeed the first time, you'll give up as a patient. But since he didn't have any option and he tried everything in the world, he persisted with Banting's obscure ideas, because they were really obscure. Nobody had done anything similar before. This is really trying out an unknown territory. And it all started with this movement, taking something we already know, more or less, and transfer that to a whole other area. Amazing thing happened. The fifth or the sixth time, it worked on Thomas. And he immediately lowered his blood sugar from something in the vicinity of 45 to 10. That's an amazing difference. 45 you can hardly move, and 10 you're a fully working person. And he actually managed to save the boy's life. He was only a couple of months from his deathbed. And this odd manner was he became the inventor of the usage of insulin. And of course this invention saved millions of people, maybe 1 billion people, I don't know, but it's constantly used everywhere. And the reason I take this up today is the very important idea of breaking the rules, so to speak. But I'm not talking about proper rules, of course. He didn't break any medical rules. Nobody, if the boy would have died, nobody would accused him. What he broke was rules of thinking. That was he broke. And I mentioned before, we know science progress this way. It's always a breakage. We don't get new knowledge. Actually, we don't get any knowledge at all if we don't break the preconceived rules. And this is the very essence of science. This is what it makes it possible to progress in science. But also, this is the way everything progresses. This also goes for literature, philosophy, architecture, thinking in general, and also the working of human beings. We don't work if we don't break the rules. But it's hard to break the rules. And one of the reasons of this, I started to get into last day, is that we have sort of a ready-made model for everything and a reality. And it seems unchangeable. We need to preserve that reality. And when we're preserving that reality, what happens is the tools, the function, this transferal that Banting did becomes impossible. Because cause and effect will lock the whole world in a deterministic world, just like Newton and everybody else has in their mind. So there is a problem here, because we don't want to get rid of the world. We need that as well. We need knowledge. And getting rid of the world is actually exactly what some not very serious postmodernists does. That was actually criticized by Steven Pinker, and a much better criticism, as Kalle sent me, I think, by, well, Daniel Dennett and everybody. But what he wrote was more or less correct. I completely agree with him. Daniel Dennett is not a stupid man. But he wrote, this is destroying knowledge. And these are those people who get so fed up with the closed rule system, so they said there is no world either. Well, they give up the world. And of course that's horrible, saying there is no truth and everything is relative, and you might as well start using drugs or joining Légion étrangère or something like that. Yeah. So his criticism, if you say that, is valid without a doubt. We will be doomed if we give up the world. But what this solution is that I started to propose last time is we could keep the world, but we will see a completely different relationship with tools like this one and the world. We can have both. We can have a world that is shared by everyone, something denied by this not very good postmodernist and delusion people. And we can also have a much more freer use of the functions, of the tools, of things like transference. And actually, when I start thinking about this, this could actually be one of the goals of Feyerabend, which he didn't really could express. He felt it. He was working with the scientists in CERN, so he saw what they were doing, constantly breaking the rules, constantly inventing new things. And he also noted it in literature. People, authors need to break rules. That is writing. Otherwise you write the same thing, and that won't sell anything, and you won't make up great literature. For instance, you cannot unthink William Blake. If a William Blake wouldn't have existed, it would have been a hole in the existence that William Blake would have been, but he would never have come automatically. So we need this force, because this is knowledge. And knowledge can be old, like Alan Bloom says. We need Shakespeare. We need to learn things by root. That, I argue, is not cutting off creativity, which goes, of course, against my own educators, who all thought that learning by root is killing off creativity. And I also met people who said painting by rules is killing off creativity. I don't think it is, but I also understand the problem. It is a severe problem. And the problem is, how do we preserve a world that is together with everyone and have fluent tools? And of course, this in a way, I would say this is bring a completely new perspective on Heidegger. Heidegger is one of those philosophers you can constantly come back to. And you don't literally need to open the books once more, because you have enough things in your head already. Of course, it's good to sort of add something, open a book once in a while, but usually those things are in your head, in your body. Maybe, and this is a very interesting thing, maybe you already have the knowledge in your doing, just like Heidegger himself had. But you also want to have it consciously. One of the reasons is you want to express it to others and to yourself. And I think this could help. Some people I know, and this is an interesting thing, I checked this out among authors, they are really afraid of expressing what they sort of know internally, because they think if they do that, they will cut off the flood of creativity, because they give it a form. You see what happens? If I have a flow of ideas, I have this, what we sometimes call implicit bodily knowledge. And if I express that, that's going to be a definite pattern. And maybe in a way, if Banting had a friend and he expressed this, he would have limited his own creativity. It could have happened, I'm not sure, but it could actually have happened. That friend would have said, it's impossible or something, but it could also be enough just to express it. You get stuck in that. And that happens actually in the daily life of a scientist. What happens, he makes some discoveries, and this is especially clear when it comes to the life of Thomas Alva Edison. Maybe one of the biggest inventors, especially when it comes to patented inventions. I don't know how many there were, but they were a lot, maybe thousands. I'm just guessing here, but it is just incredible. But what happens, he tells himself that once he invented something, you sort of express it, you start building the things you do, like the light bulb, and you get stuck in some sort of thinking. Stuck is a hard word, but somehow your thinking gets limited to that, and you start thinking in that pattern, and then you want to discover something new, and this pattern might be in the way somehow. And what happened with Edison, he was always able to crack free somehow and develop a whole new pathway. He went from the light bulb to discover a new way of handling electricity, which was even more, well, both were incredibly important. And then he went to the phonograph, and we had all this doodah with Mary Has a Little Lamb, the first recording ever in humankind, which is amazing in itself. You hear Edison the width of his innovations incredible. That doesn't happen anyway. Today is much more narrow. You don't both invent electricity in some way and then you go to invent the phonograph or the gramophone or something like that. They're just two broad alleys today. But there's a problem with specialization. You start using rules and you start using limited functions. And one limited function that goes for everyone is classical physics. It's an explicit take on something that is implicit. I mentioned it many times. It's a special explicit reference to gravity, for instance. Gravity in Newtonian sense is the force that drags me to the center of the earth, the very exact center of the earth. And once you get stuck in that, it's very hard to break. And that happened. That actually happened for, let's see, almost 300 years. It was impossible to break. And one of the reasons was it was so effective, because it was so good. That makes it much harder to break. Much harder to break. And it was finally Einstein who broke it. And he said he took an enormous effort to do that. But we are sort of stuck into that thinking, and our firm reality, our objective reality, is the Newtonian reality / Greek reality. And that is very limiting. And it's not true to reality either, oddly enough. It's not true to reality. We know that. That lesson came later than Einstein came in quantum physics. So we are not in step with reality. But it's not as easy as Newtonian physics. We cannot produce a new model because this is breaking a lot of the old rules. And to do that is very difficult because you lose the whole lot, it feels like. Well, I say it doesn't. And this is my own little solution. I will use this gallbladder here, if I'm excused, and I will cross it over like this. And this is just a happenstance. We talked about crossing over before, but this is an actual sign. And it means not zero. How odd! Which philosopher invented this? It's not an invention by a philosopher. This is an invention from logic. And the reason is you want something to write if you have different values. Let's say you have different values here. You can have 1, you can have 0, you can have 1. But maybe in one box there doesn't go a value at all. Nothing will enter. And that is very different from nothing, and it's also very different from something. And it's not in between. So it's not nothing, it's not something. And this has been in use for at least 100 years. And it's very effective. Think about it like this. This idea of a meta place where everything is constructed, this is actually what happens in Newtonian physics. I spoke about that before. There is an origo, the subject. There's an empty space in front of me, which is stable, which is very important. And there you have the axis X, Y, and Z. And there you can have motion, because you can tell when a particle goes from the values X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, to X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, 4 instead. It's a movement. So you need to have everything stable so something can move. Otherwise, it won't work. If everything moves, you don't have any. So you have to invent the origo. And that was already invented long before Newton. But it causes a problem. You get stuck in it. And I would say there is hardly anyone alive today in the Western Hemisphere who's not stuck in this. And it's very, very problematic because it's not real. But how do we do the transferal? How do we go from one place to the other? Nobody explained that. No have given a good solution. To me, at least, before I read last day's article. I realized we need to make a transgression. It reminds me of the transgression, another transgression that's very difficult to make, and that's the one that singer Ricky Martin made. I'm not great fan of Ricky Martin, but he started out, let's say, he started out in classical physics. He was only in the arena of the Spanish talking world. He's from Puerto Rico. Everything was Spanish. His movement was Spanish. His audience was Spanish. The text was Spanish. But he wanted to transfer to quantum physics. And that was the English-speaking world. US, England, rest of the world. And that is very hard because you need to reconstruct yourself. You cannot have this, well, I don't know much about music, but you can't have this tremble in the voice, which is so highly appreciated among Spanish singers like Julio Iglesias. But it has an effect on English-speaking people and me as well, and a sort of something happens in my stomach and I need to go somewhere. It's something you need to get rid of. It's not only that, it's the whole concept, and everything is connected. The singing is connected to the movement. Everything needs to be changed at once. If you do it halfway, it won't work. And so many people tried. There must be hundreds by now, because it's so much more, there's a lot more money to come in if you reach the whole world instead of just the Spanish-speaking world. And Ricky Martin, it was like people died in front of his feet, and sure we would do it in English as well. Well, they did, but so many other artists like Juanes, I can mention so many, they never made it. They lost actually a lot of millions. And that is actually the same thing that happens here. And you need some tools to do that. You cannot just jump from quantum physics to, from classical physics to quantum physics. I think that's more or less proven by practice now. We try with so many people and they get frustrated and they start almost to scream. Well, they start to scream. I heard them so many times. Or they get very, very annoyed over email and write horrible things that you regret later. I'm not speaking to anyone in particular here. I'm pretty sure that happened many times before. Now, this gives an easier way, and what you will understand if I sort of convince you, or I get convinced myself because I'm just trying it out, it is once you start practice to do this, you will not run into the thing that the meta level is empty. This is what the postmodernists are saying. There is no system up there. Everything is happenstance. I might as well take drugs. I might as well go out on a raft on the Niagara Falls. Well, it's not a coincidence. Loads of these people are very self-destructive. There's no need for that, because the position above is not zero. Also, it's not one, as it in classical physics that says there's a meta level. What you will experience is, it's nil. Nothing is supposed to be there. And you actually get closer to reality. And this is the actual movement you feel. You go from the top level that is actually nil. So you don't have to fear any emptiness. And what you will notice by practice, the meta level is nil. It's not empty. Because it's the emptiness we fear the most. Complete disorganization. Chaotic. Without sense. I think that's actually what Daniel Dennett says about postmodernism and also quantum physics, without sense. And for instance, another friend of mine, Håkan, the ex-clerk in Lilla Therese, downtown Gothenburg. He was a civil engineer, and he said, I don't like quantum physics because I wouldn't like at the end of my life when God said, everything is chance, and by chance you're not getting into heaven. And he also mentioned, by chance, the whole world could say the sinners won't be punished and the good ones won't be rewarded. So therefore I don't like quantum physics. And he had a huge experience. He was an well, he still is an engineer, you never lose, but he's a civil engineer from Chalmers. So that is, however, not necessary, that conclusion he drew. Actually, you will see just the opposite. Something much more regulated, and there will be no absolute contradiction in that sense, that you are 100% you, subjective, and the world is 100% objective as well. That contradiction ceases once you go into practice. And that's by understanding the tools are having their specific purpose, just like Wittgenstein says about the language world. It's similar here. Of course, he is my gallbladder that I used to transfer to get to this conclusion easier. But he said, once you start extra using one, misusing one word, I mentioned one before, and that is meaning, betydelse. Once you start thinking that is a more important word, so to speak, you will destroy the whole language game for yourself. You stop understanding. But whereas Wittgenstein maybe expressed himself in a way that led me astray, well, not only me, from Richter as well, and loads of other people interpreting Wittgenstein, it's not a higher level. It's a nil position. And I don't like to call it an illusion either, because once you practice, you realize reality starts here, and that's much more real as well. Let me cite de Broglie, reality starts with quantum mechanics. You start realizing the other thing was sort of an ersatz. Of course, we know this for a while in this lecture series. We know that Leibniz and Berkeley, they all protested against absolute space and absolute time. That's nonsense, that's not part of reality, it's just an invention. But we really need to practice it as well, to get into the juicy, meaty details of real existence. And trust me, you will gain in both ends. You're not losing in any ends. And I'm not going to give sort of an encouragement speech here, because that's another lecture or not a lecture at all. But I just put it brief, you gain in all ends. But if you just start in this way, because this is the sensible way of starting the whole thing. Because even with great revolts, you won't give up this idea that there is either a 0 here or a 1 here. The misuse of tools. And you'll be so happy when the tools start working much better for you. You'll be able to look at them and be more specific, more exacting. Thinking starts with this. Precise thinking, actual thinking. Language gets its revival. And maybe a last helpful thing could be that this historical development from a reality that everything happened at the same time and space, what was at only one point, one singular point, almost like before Big Bang. And then we as human beings, we living human beings, started to use tools. So everything is still that. Everything is a wholeness still. It's just that we got just fantastic tools. And the only thing you have to use is to appreciate these tools and use them more effectively. So it's gain in all areas. There's no loss anywhere. So this perceived loss is not, it's nil. It's nil. And no wonder Daniel Dennett and even Steven Pinker here, it was a great thing you guys sent me. I don't know if it was Henrik or Kalle. He defended rationality and he made a YouTube clip, and even his own supporter wrote in the commentaries, Steven Pinker is not the one to defend rationality. That's what happens if you cling to that too much. You start sounding off. You don't sound real anymore. And he sure doesn't sound real anymore, poor Steven Pinker. He lost it somewhere in that battle. It sounds really off, and his defense of reality becomes a little bit like the crusade that Don Quixote made against the weather mills. Riding against them, shouting to them, saying, "You are my enemy. Come on, Sancho Panza." That is Steven Pinker today. I only saw one positive comment among 500, something like that. One. Nobody gives him any credit anymore because he sounds off. Some people could constructively criticize him, but he sounds off anyway. Doesn't matter. You'll be always off. So I just have to finish up. This helps both the understanding of Heidegger. It helped Wittgenstein, but I also got a lot of help from Wittgenstein. And I think this is a tool by itself that doesn't get stuck. And in that way, it actually reminds me of a third philosopher, Derrida, because he constructed tools for our benefits that we didn't get stuck into. Deconstruction, binary opposition, difference, they are not things that drive us down. They are not like absolute space or absolute time. They're actually helpful. We can use them when they're fitting, but they never lead us to believe they have onto character. And that's an amazing help. So there is actually, the whole thing is spiced up by Derrida in the end. And I don't know if he came in contact with this philosophy or psychology or whatever you call it, but it's very effectful. And you don't have to sort of oblige yourself to anything. You take as much as you need, and it helps to open up all other tools. Well, I think that's enough. This was one of those tougher morning lectures here, so that's quite enough for now. But let me end up saying this looks very promising. It's like a new spring coming onto us. And I say thank you very much for listening and have a pleasant afternoon.